My name is Arthur Corrigan. For 32 years, I was the sheriff of Aspen Creek County. I'm 63 now, retired for the last 5. Most folks around here still call me sheriff, more out of habit than anything else. I was born in this county, and I expect I'll die here. I know these mountains, these forests, like the back of my own hand. I've hunted in them, hiked through them, and chased fugitives into their darkest corners. I thought I knew every sound, every track, every shadow. I believed that for everything that happened in my jurisdiction, there was a rational, earthbound explanation. A person, an animal, a weather event, something you could write down in a report, something that fit within the known parameters of the world. I was wrong. Terribly wrong. And that wrongness cost good people their lives and left the rest of us marked in ways that don't ever heal. My retirement plan was simple. Solitude, but not isolation. I'd bought the old decommissioned ranger station up on Black Ridge 20 years ago. It sat at the dead end of a 14-mile gravel road that was barely maintained by the county. No power lines reached it. I had a generator and propane tanks. No water main. A deep well provided clean, cold water. Cell service was a joke. You might get a bar or two if you stood on the roof and the wind was blowing just right. It was my sanctuary, a place to read, to think, to watch the seasons change without the constant hum of civilization. My former deputy, Jake Riley, would come up sometimes. He was a good kid, sharp and steady, who took over as a senior deputy when I left. He'd bring his boy, and I'd teach him how to track, how to read a compass. It was a good life, a quiet life, the kind of peace you earn after 3 decades of dealing with the worst parts of human nature. The story doesn't start with a scream or a monster. It starts with something small, something you'd dismiss. It started with the sheep. Tom Ingersoll, who has a ranch down in the valley where the gravel road begins, called me one morning. Not the new sheriff, Miller, but me. Tom and I went back to grade school. He sounded rattled. He'd lost 6 ewes. Now, losing livestock to predators is part of life out here. A coyote pack gets bold, a mountain lion wanders down from the high country. It happens. But this was different. I drove my truck down to his place. Tom was standing by the fence, his face pale. "Art," he said, not even a hello. "Look at this." I followed his gaze to the pasture. The sheep weren't just killed. They were dismantled. A leg here, a torso there. It wasn't the work of coyotes. They're opportunists. They nip and tear. It wasn't a cougar. They're efficient. They go for the neck and drag their kill away. It wasn't a bear either. A bear will maul, but this was precise. The carcasses were ripped apart with what looked like incredible force. The thing that struck me, the detail that lodged in my brain like a splinter, was that very little was actually eaten. It was a slaughter, not a hunt. It was killing for the sake of killing. "What in God's name does that?" Tom asked, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't have an answer. I walked the scene like I was still wearing the badge. I found tracks, but the ground was torn up by the panicked sheep, and it was hard to get a clean impression. What I could make out didn't make sense. They were big, bigger than any bear print I'd ever seen, and they seemed elongated, almost like a canine track, but stretched, distorted. And there were only 2 of them in one spot, suggesting something had stood on 2 legs. I told myself I was misinterpreting it. The ground was soft. The impression was probably smeared. A bear, I told Tom. A big, mean, possibly sick bear. It was the only logical box I could fit it into. He didn't look convinced,
And if I'm being honest, neither was I.
A few weeks passed. The story of Tom's sheep made the rounds at the diner in town. It got embellished, as those things do. Brian, a loudmouth hunter who thought he was God's gift to the wilderness, laughed it off. He was sitting in his usual booth, holding court. "Probably just some city kids with a couple of big dogs they can't handle," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Art's getting soft in his old age, seeing monsters in the shadows." I was sitting at the counter and didn't turn around. I just stirred my coffee and let him talk. In a small town, you learn to let a lot of things go. The next sign came closer to home. I was up at my cabin, splitting wood for the coming winter. The air was crisp, the sky a deep, cloudless blue. It was quiet. Too quiet. That was the first thing I noticed. Usually the forest is a symphony of noise. Squirrels chattering, birds calling, the wind rustling the leaves. But that afternoon, there was a profound, unnatural silence. The kind of silence that presses in on you, that feels heavy. It's the silence of 100 small creatures holding their breath at once. Every hunter knows that silence. It means a predator is near. A big one. I set the axe down and listened, scanning the dense tree line that bordered my clearing. Nothing. Not a twitch of a branch, not a sound. I walked the perimeter of my property. On the north side, near the creek, I found them. Tracks. Same as the ones at Tom's ranch, but these were clearer, pressed deep into the damp earth near the water. They were enormous. Each print was a good 16 inches long. It had the basic shape of a canine paw, a central pad, 4 toes, claw marks dug into the dirt ahead of them. But it was walking on its heel, like a man. The stride was immense, at least 6 feet between prints, and it was bipedal. There was no second set of prints for front paws. It had walked along the creek on 2 legs. I stood there for a long time, the cold dread starting to seep into my bones. I took out my phone, knowing it was useless, but I tried anyway. No signal. I took pictures, dozens of them, from every angle, with a ruler for scale. This was evidence. This was something tangible. I tried to rationalize it. A prank? Someone with a flair for the dramatic wearing costume feet? But the depth of the prints, the sheer weight they implied. No, this was not a man in a suit. I backed away slowly, my hand resting on the holstered .44 Magnum I always carried in the woods. The silence was still there, thick and watchful. I felt like I was being observed by something ancient and malevolent. That night, for the first time in 20 years, I bolted the heavy crossbar on the inside of my cabin door. The next day I drove into town and went straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Miller, my replacement, is a different kind of lawman. He's younger, has a degree in criminal justice, and is more concerned with budgets and public relations than with the grit of police work. He sees me as a dinosaur, a relic of a bygone era. I showed him the pictures on my phone. He scrolled through them with a polite, dismissive expression. "Interesting, Art," he said, handing the phone back. "Looks like a big bear, maybe a grizzly that wandered down from further north. The prints get distorted in soft mud, you know that." "Dan, that's not a bear," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "A bear doesn't walk on 2 legs for a quarter of a mile, and the stride is all wrong. Look at the claw marks. This is something else." He leaned back in his chair, a little smirk playing on his lips. "Something else? Like what? The Aspen Creek Howler?" That was the local boogeyman, the story parents told their kids to keep them from wandering into the woods after dark. "Come on, Art. You've been retired a little too long. You're starting to believe the local ghost stories." I felt a flash of anger. This isn't a ghost story. Tom Ingersoll is out 6 ewes, and whatever did it left these tracks. Tom's sheep were killed by coyotes, he said, his tone final. The Fish and Game report confirmed it. He was lying, or at least misrepresenting. Fish and Game had listed the cause as unknown predator. I knew because I'd called the warden myself. Miller was closing ranks, tidying up the narrative. He didn't want an unsolved mystery in his county. He wanted a simple, easy explanation. I left his office feeling frustrated and, for the first time, truly alone in this. It was about a week after my visit to Miller that the 911 call came in. It was late, around 11 at night. Jake called me. He wasn't supposed to. It was against protocol, but we had that kind of relationship. "Art," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We just got a call from the old Henderson place.
A couple of city folks bought it, named Corey and Megan. They're hysterical. Say something's trying to get into their house." The Henderson place was even more remote than my cabin, further up the mountain on a different spur road. "What are they saying?" I asked, already pulling on my boots. "They say it's big, tearing at the siding. They heard it on the porch, said it was turning the doorknob." The last part hung in the air. Animals don't turn doorknobs. "What's Miller doing?" "Sending a unit, but it'll take them 45 minutes to get there, best case. The couple sounds terrified, Art. I've never heard anything like it." "I'm closer," I said. "I can be there in 20. It was true. A network of old logging trails connected my ridge to theirs. My truck could handle it. "Be careful," Jake said. "This feels off." The drive was tense. The logging trail was rough, and my headlights cut a frantic, narrow tunnel through the oppressive darkness. The woods felt different at night now, hostile. When I pulled up to the Henderson place, the exterior floodlights were on, casting long, dancing shadows. The house was a modern A-frame, all glass and wood. I saw a patrol car was already there. 2 deputies, young guys I barely knew, were standing on the porch talking to a man who must have been Corey. I got out of my truck, my hand near my sidearm. Corey was in his mid-30s, wearing pajamas, his face ashen. The deputies looked bored. "Everything's all right, sir," one of them said to me, a little too casually. "Folks just got spooked by a raccoon." "A raccoon?" I said, looking at the front door. There were deep, splintery gouges in the heavy oak, at least 4 feet off the ground. The brass doorknob was scratched and dented, as if it had been bitten or gripped by something with immense force. I walked over to a large picture window. It was a double-pane window, and the outer pane was spiderwebbed with cracks, a large, greasy smear in the center. "That must have been one hell of a raccoon," I said, my voice flat. Corey finally spoke, his voice trembling. "It wasn't a raccoon. It was big. It was on the deck, walking on 2 legs. We saw the silhouette against the window. It was huge. Then it started pushing on the glass. We thought it was going to come right through." His wife Megan was sobbing just inside the doorway. The deputies shared a look. The look that says crazy city people. "Sir, we've swept the area," the lead deputy said. "There's nothing here. Probably a bear. They can be curious." "Did it turn the doorknob?" I asked, pointing to the damaged brass. The deputy shrugged. "Bears are strong. They can do weird things when they're trying to get at food." I knew it was useless. They had their story, and they were sticking to it. They gave the couple a warning about securing their trash and left. I stayed. I talked to Corey and Megan for an hour. Corey, it turned out, had done a few tours in the Army. He wasn't a man prone to hysterics. He described the sounds, the feeling of the house vibrating as the thing threw its weight against the walls. He described the sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps on the deck, not the scuttling of a 4-legged animal. Megan talked about the breathing,
a low, wet, guttural sound right outside the window. She said she heard it sniff, a long, deep inhale, as if it was tasting the air, smelling them inside. I checked the perimeter myself after they went to bed, locking themselves in their bedroom. I found more tracks in the flower bed beneath the broken window, the same impossible, elongated canine prints. This time, I also found a handprint. Smeared in the grease on the window was the clear impression of a 5-fingered hand. The fingers were too long, the palm too wide, but it was undeniably a hand with what looked like thick, pointed claws at the end of each digit. My blood ran cold. I wiped the print off with my sleeve before I left. There was no point in leaving it for Miller's deputies to explain away. This was my problem now. I had to see it. I had to know what I was dealing with. That's when I decided to use my own cabin as bait. It was a foolish, prideful decision, born of a lifetime of believing I was the one who ran things in these woods. I called Jake. I told him what I was planning, and I told him to stay away. I said it was my own damn business. He refused. "If you're going up there to hunt this thing, you're not doing it alone," he said. "I'm a deputy of this county. If there's a threat to its citizens, it's my job to face it, with you or without you." I knew I couldn't argue. A part of me, the part that was terrified, was glad he was coming. We prepared. We treated it like a tactical operation. We brought my old 12-gauge pump-action shotgun, Jake's service rifle, and plenty of ammunition. We boarded up most of the windows on the ground floor, leaving only small slits to see and shoot through. We reinforced the front and back doors with extra 2x4s. We filled extra cans for the generator and stockpiled food and water. We were turning my peaceful sanctuary into a fortress. We settled in for the first night. The silence was the first thing to return. That same heavy, expectant hush fell over the forest as dusk painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. We sat in the dark, not speaking, our ears straining to catch any sound. Hours passed. The generator hummed, a lonely sound in the vast wilderness. Nothing. The second night was the same. A tense, nerve-wracking stillness. I started to think maybe I was wrong. Maybe the creature had moved on. Maybe it was all just a series of bizarre coincidences. It was on the third night that it came. The moon was a slender crescent, providing almost no light. The woods were a wall of impenetrable black. We were taking shifts. I was on watch, sitting in a chair facing the boarded-up front window, the shotgun resting across my lap. Jake was asleep on a cot in the back room. Around 2 a.m, I heard it. A single, heavy footstep on the porch, a snap of a dry twig. It was so quiet, so deliberate, I almost thought I'd imagined it. I held my breath. My heart was a drum against my ribs. Then came a sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. A low, sniffing sound, right at the door. A long, wet intake of air. It was smelling us. It knew we were inside. I slowly, silently, reached over and shook Jake's shoulder. He was awake instantly, his eyes wide in the dim light. I put a finger to my lips and pointed toward the door. He grabbed his rifle. Then came the scratching. A light, exploratory scraping at the door. Not the frantic scrabbling of an animal, but the methodical sound of something testing the wood, feeling for a weakness. It went on for a full minute, then stopped. Silence descended again, more terrifying than the noise had been. We waited. 10 minutes passed. 20. Nothing. Jake whispered, "Did it leave?" Before I could answer, a tremendous crash came from the back of the cabin. It sounded like a car had hit the wall. We scrambled into the back room. A heavy log, One I had cut for firewood and left stacked by the wall had been thrown against the cabin. It had struck with enough force to crack two of the thick timbers that formed the wall. It was a diversion. We heard a splintering sound from the front room. We ran back in just in time to see the heavy oak door shudder in its frame. Something was pushing against it. Something with immense, unbelievable strength. The crossbar I had installed was bowing, the wood groaning in protest.
A deep, guttural growl vibrated through the floor, a sound of pure, primal rage. "The window!" Jake yelled, pointing his rifle. Through the narrow slit we had left in the plywood, I saw it, a shape, a head. For a split second, a flash of lightning from a distant, dry storm illuminated the clearing. I saw a long, canine muzzle, like a wolf or a German shepherd. Ears were pricked forward, alert and intelligent. But the eyes were not animal. They glowed with a faint, reddish luminescence, and they were filled with a terrifying, hateful intelligence. They were staring right at me. The head was attached to a massive, broad-shouldered torso that was impossibly tall. It was standing on the porch, on two legs, like a man. The creature let out another roar, a deafening sound that was part wolf howl, part bear roar, and part something horribly, sickeningly human. It threw its full weight against the door again.
This time, the top hinge ripped out of the frame with a scream of tortured metal. The door canted inward, held only by the bottom hinge and the groaning crossbar. A long, spindly arm covered in coarse, dark fur snaked through the gap. The hand had 5 long, claw-tipped fingers that flexed and grasped at the air. "Shoot it!" I screamed. Jake opened fire with his rifle. The bullets punched through the door, but the creature just roared in what sounded more like anger than pain. It withdrew its arm. We thought we had a moment's reprieve, but then the attack shifted. We heard a scrambling sound on the roof, the sound of heavy claws on the metal sheeting. It was climbing. "It's on the roof!" I yelled. We looked up, and the ceiling began to bulge downward in one spot. Dust and splinters rained down on us. It was trying to tear its way through. I fired a round from the shotgun into the ceiling. The blast was deafening inside the small cabin.
A spray of black, foul-smelling liquid dripped down, followed by a shriek of pain from above. The weight on the roof shifted, and we heard it scramble back down. It was intelligent. It was testing us, probing for weaknesses, changing its tactics. This wasn't a dumb beast. It was a hunter, and we were the prey. The next hour was a blur of chaos and terror. The creature, or maybe there were 2 of them now, we couldn't be sure, circled the cabin relentlessly. They threw rocks the size of bowling balls against the walls, shattering the plywood we had nailed up. Claws punched through the walls in random places, trying to get at us. We'd fire at the sounds, and the claws would retreat, only to appear somewhere else moments later. The generator sputtered and died. They had found the fuel line and ripped it out. The lights went out, plunging us into absolute darkness, broken only by the muzzle flashes of our guns. Jake was by the back wall when it happened. He was trying to peer through a crack in the timbers. A claw, thick as a railroad spike, burst through the wood right next to his head. He yelled and jumped back, but not fast enough. The claw raked across his left arm, tearing through his thick jacket and deep into the muscle. He screamed, a raw, sharp cry of pain, and fell back, his rifle clattering to the floor. I rushed to his side, dragging him away from the wall. Blood was everywhere, soaking his sleeve, pooling on the floor. I ripped a piece of a shirt and tried to make a tourniquet, my hands shaking in the dark. I'm okay, he grunted, but his face was pale, and I could see he was going into shock. And then we heard a new sound. It was coming from the direction of the Henderson place. A truck, driving fast.
the sound of a roaring engine and tires churning on gravel. For a heart-stopping moment, I felt a surge of hope. It was Miller. He'd finally listened. He'd sent backup.
The sound grew closer, then abruptly stopped. A single, terrified human scream cut through the night, followed by the sound of metal being torn and glass shattering. Then, silence. The hope died in my throat, replaced by a cold, sickening certainty. It wasn't help. It was more victims. I found out later it was Brian, the loudmouth hunter. He and a friend had decided to go looking for the Aspen Creek howler on a drunken dare, a chance to prove how tough they were. They had found it. The creatures were gone from our cabin. We could hear them down the road, hear the terrible, wet, tearing sounds. They had found new, easier prey. Jake was bleeding badly, and I knew if I didn't get him to a hospital, he would die. We had a window. It was a terrible, ghoulish opportunity, bought with the lives of 2 foolish men, but it was all we had. "We have to go," I said, hauling Jake to his feet. "Now." He could barely stand. I half-carried, half-dragged him out the back door, the one that was miraculously undamaged. The air was cold and smelled of pine and blood. The moon was gone. The darkness was absolute. We stumbled towards my truck, parked 50 yards away. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves was the sound of our pursuer. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was sure they would come back for us. I fumbled with the keys, my hands slick with Jake's blood. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed as loud as a gunshot. I shoved Jake into the passenger seat and ran around to the driver's side. The keys scraped against the ignition. "Please start, please start, please start." The engine turned over, the roar of the V8 shattering the silence. I slammed the truck into gear and stomped on the gas. The tires spun on the loose gravel, then bit. We shot forward, the headlights cutting through the darkness. As we fishtailed onto the main gravel road, my headlights swept across the scene of the other attack. Brian's pickup truck was a wreck. It looked like it had been hit by a train. The roof was crushed. The doors were torn off their hinges. The windshield was a web of shattered glass. There was blood on the ground. A lot of it. I didn't slow down. I couldn't. I forced myself to look straight ahead, at the ribbon of road illuminated by my lights, the only thing between us and the all-consuming darkness. We didn't speak for the entire 14-mile drive back to the paved road. I drove faster than I ever had in my life. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I expected to see a tall, dark shape loping behind us, effortlessly keeping pace. But there was nothing, just the blackness. When we finally hit the asphalt of the main highway, I felt a wave of relief so powerful my whole body trembled. We weren't safe, not really, but we were out of its world and back in ours. I drove straight to the emergency room at the county hospital. I left the truck running at the entrance and helped Jake inside. The nurses and doctors swarmed him. I was covered in his blood. My hands were shaking, and I probably looked like a madman. A state trooper who was at the hospital on an unrelated matter took me aside. He asked me what happened. "Bear attack," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "A big one, up on Black Ridge." It was the only explanation they would accept. It was the lie I had to tell to get Jake the help he needed without getting us both locked in a psychiatric ward. The next morning, after Jake was stable, he'd need surgery and would never have full use of that arm again. I went to see Sheriff Miller. I didn't go as a friend or a predecessor. I went as a witness. Corey and Megan were with me. They had heard about the incident with Brian's truck on the local news, a tragic single-vehicle accident, and they had called me, terrified. They knew what it really was. I walked into Miller's office, the three of us standing there like refugees. I told him everything.
The siege, the creature on the roof, the intelligent tactics, the way it bent Corey's rifle, Jake's injury, the sounds from Brian's truck. I laid it all out, my voice flat and emotionless. I was making a formal statement. Miller listened, his face a mask of professional concern. When I was finished, he steepled his fingers and looked at me. "Art," he said, his voice soft and patronizing, "you've been through a traumatic experience. You and Deputy Riley were attacked by a large, aggressive bear, probably the same one that's been causing trouble all season. In the dark, in a panic, your mind can play tricks on you. You see things that aren't there. You interpret sounds. It wasn't a bear, Dan." I cut him off, my voice dangerously low. A bear did not kill Brian and his friend. A bear did not try to turn the knob on Corey and Megan's door. A bear does not walk on 2 feet. He sighed, a world-weary sigh of a man dealing with a difficult child. The preliminary report on Brian's accident indicates he was driving under the influence. He lost control of his vehicle and rolled it. It's tragic, but it's not mysterious. As for your incident, I'll send a team up to your cabin to collect evidence of the bear. We'll have Fish and Game set traps. He was building the official story right in front of me, brick by brick, a story that was clean, simple, and completely false. He was covering it up, not because he was part of some grand conspiracy, but because he was a bureaucrat. He couldn't handle the truth. The truth was messy. It was terrifying. It didn't fit on his forms. Corey tried to argue, but Miller shut him down. Megan was crying silently. I knew it was over. We were just 3 hysterical people in his eyes. He had his explanation. The case was closed. We left. There was nothing else to do. As we walked out, I felt a profound sense of isolation. I had spent my entire life as a part of the system, a defender of the order of things. Now, I was on the outside, looking in. I was the crazy old man with a wild story. The very thing I had once dismissed in others. A week later, I got a phone call from an old friend, a man named George, who had been a game warden in the county for 40 years before he retired. He was even more of a relic than I was. "Heard you had some trouble up on the ridge, Art," he said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "You could say that, George." There was a long pause. "Sheriff Miller's telling everyone it was a bear." "That's the official story." "Yeah, well," George said, and I could hear him sigh. "The official story is usually horse manure. I'm calling to tell you you're not crazy." "And to tell you to sell that cabin and never go back up there." "What do you know, George?" I asked, my heart starting to pound again. "I know that over the last 40 years, we've had 6 unexplained disappearances and 12 freak animal attacks in that specific quadrant of the forest. Hunters who go in and never come out. Campers whose gear is found shredded with no sign of them. The official reports always say bear attack or exposure. But the ones who worked the scenes, we knew. We'd find tracks like the ones you probably found. We'd find things that didn't make sense. We learned to just file the report and not ask too many questions. There are some things in those woods, Art. Some things that were here long before we were. And they don't like us trespassing. You were lucky to get out alive. Take the win and walk away." He hung up. That was it. No grand revelation. Just a quiet, unofficial acknowledgement from one old man to another. It was a confirmation that I wasn't insane, but it was also a confirmation that we were utterly, completely on our own. The aftermath was quiet and devastating. Jake quit the force. He couldn't do the job with one good arm, but more than that, He couldn't stay in a place that refused to acknowledge what had tried to kill him. He packed up his family and moved to Oregon to be with his wife's parents. We talk on the phone sometimes, but it's not the same. There's a distance. We're members of a club no one wants to join. Corey and Megan sold their house for a fraction of what they paid for it. They fled back to the city, leaving a note for me, thanking me for trying to help. They just wanted to forget. I don't blame them. I sold the ranger station. The man who bought it was a developer from California who planned to tear it down and build a luxury retreat. I didn't tell him. I took his money and walked away. Sometimes I feel guilty about that.
Then I remember the way Miller looked at me, and the guilt fades. The town has its story. Let them keep it. I live in a small house in town now. The woods are only a few miles away, but they feel like a different country. I don't hunt anymore. I don't hike. When I look at the mountains that I used to love, the mountains that I considered my home, all I feel is a cold, quiet dread. I see the dark spaces between the trees, and I know what can live there. My name is Arthur Corrigan. I am a survivor, but I am not the man I was. That man died in the cabin on Black Ridge, listening to the screams of men being torn apart in the dark. The man who is left is just a ghost, haunted by the memory of glowing red eyes and the sound of claws on a wooden door. I am telling you this not for sympathy, not for belief. I am telling you this because you need to know. There are things in this world that defy our understanding, that exist on the edges of our maps and our sanity. If you ever find yourself in the deep woods, and a sudden, unnatural silence falls, and you get that primal feeling of being watched, don't rationalize it. Don't try to be brave. Run, and don't look back. Because what you don't believe in can still kill you. It can still hunt you. And it can still leave you alone in the dark with nothing but the truth.